As managing director of Silicon Valley Robotics, it's an organization dedicated to shepherding robotics from the research labs into the real world. And you might think that makes me a cheerleader for robots, but actually, it puts me in a really good position to talk about what are the ethics of robots and how do we avoid the ROBOPOCALYPSE. So that's my interest, and I'm sure we share that goal. The thing is, the ROBOPOCALYPSE, it's not science fiction. The robots really are coming. But you don't blame the robots, you blame the robot builders. By and large, they all look like that. Not always creepy, but it's a very, very small demographic. It's the privileged white male. And I don't think I need to school anybody on the tech figures. It's worse now than it was in the 70s, and robotics, if anything, is worse than any other segment of tech. Here's an interesting thing that I've observed over the last 20-odd years, is that the companies that have women have amazing women, and they have a lot of women. Companies that are diverse are great, but what that means is that the rest of the companies are like zero diversity. And I think I'm somehow clicking slides without intending to. So where will we go with that? Lack of diversity means that we do have a problem, because lack of diversity in robotics builders means lack of diversity in robots. And it means that we're sacrificing a huge part of our innovation potential. We don't really know what that is that we're missing out on. And we worry about AI. Well, AI is actually very stupid and it's very narrow. What we need to worry about is our artificial stupidity running amok. And our artificial stupidity, when it's embedded in a physical system, aka a robot, then that can be problems. I'm going to talk about 5 problems. The first one's robot smog. And smog is exactly that. It's physical particulate in our environment or atmosphere. Now imagine not just little particles, but larger particles or robots everywhere. As happened with the rollout of the automobile, we actually had 30 years of chaos before the regulations and the culture sufficiently tamed the rollout of that technology. And we already have swarm robots, where multiple robots are working together, but it's in unison and it tends to be in one place, a warehouse or a factory. We're on the verge of multiple robots working not in unison, independently, all over our streets and in our skies. That's smog. We're also going to have robot spam, where robots are attempting to get our attention. Many places that we've not previously had spam or robocallers. Why? Well, the advertising industry is one of the oldest human industries. This is an ancient Etruscan or Greek vase from a couple of thousand years ago, and it actually says, "This olive oil is better than the olive oil down the street." So not only does our advertising work on our location, it works on our demographics. And now that we're online and are putting our personalities online, it works on our psychographics, which is a very specific understanding of who we are. I might be a woman of a certain age, but do I like dogs or do I like cats? We're starting to get very fine-grained information about us, partly because of our social robots, but also all of these robots in our homes, on our streets and in our shops will be able to use that information. Some are being designed explicitly to roam around advertising to us, so spam robots, but there are 3 other major problems: robot stereotypes, robot surveillance, and robot subversion that I hope to talk about. Stereotypes are perhaps one of the easiest problems for us to recognize, because we are creatures who understand stereotypes. It's a very human behavior. We understand cognitive biases. They're cognitive shortcuts, in actual fact. All of our world is full of these cognitive biases, hundreds and hundreds of them. Why? Because those cognitive shortcuts saved our lives over hundreds and thousands of years of evolution. What worries me is what role those cognitive shortcuts will play when they're embodied in our fixed physical systems. For example, one of the shortcuts we have is, one of the stereotypes is that women don't build robots. So when I search for a picture of a female robot engineer to fill out a presentation, I get a lot of pictures of male engineers building female robots. And when I do find a female engineer, I don't think I'd trust her with building anything. We also find that a lot of robots are built for blokes, not for women. You know, they're bro droids built by brogrammers, like the Brodiga. And I think it's also been called the mum apps, the things that college boys build to replace the mother or other women in their lives. And you say, well, maybe a woman would build a different app, not just fetch beer, although I'm partial to a beer myself, being Australian. Also, robots inherently are not diverse. They are homogeneous and mass-produced. So whatever we build, we're going to multiply it. Robots work on stereotype data. Our data sets are abysmal, and they are highly biased towards groups of the population that I think you can predict. I am embarrassed to say that last time I checked, this was still the Wikipedia image for facial recognition systems. Fail. But that is the software. The OpenCV library is one of the most widely used libraries. This is what it produces. I think this is just one small example of the biased data sets that we're working with that create biased algorithms. Also, we build servile female robots. A lot of robot roles are kiosk and reception roles. And why do we do that? Well, think of our voice assistants, Cortana, Alexa, Siri, all of those female voices. Now, you can change them. Most people don't. But what's scary is that Alexa started out gender neutral, I believe, but through machine learning and feedback, adopted a female voice. Why? Cognitive studies show that we, generally speaking, find a female voice to be sympathetic and suggestive. And we find a male voice to be active, directive, and commanding. So we use those for different things. In the subway in London, I was just there, and it was, we're now approaching Hampstead Heath. The second station will be Mind the Gap. Also, we build sexy female robots. Now, there's an inherent issue around the physical structure of robots, the size of the hips, the size of the shoulders. Sometimes builders can't help it. But we fall into the cultural trap where if a robot is neutral, it's actually male, unless we decide to make it female and then we mark it through the sexual characteristics. So any female robot you see is representing feminized sexuality. Also, robots are slaves. Well, they really ought to be, because they're supposed to be taking our orders. What worries me is what happens in the soup of all of these biases and behaviors when it's feeding back into society. And we think that robotics is a neutral and objective technology, but just like the algorithms it's built on, it is not. Robotics is inherently biased, as it's built on inherently biased algorithms, and it's fixed in physical form and will be feeding back over and over again into the society just when we thought we were making progress, making social change against utterances, behaviors, and cultures, which are dynamic. Now, we're building it into our structures. Oh, and I didn't even get to the next problems, robot surveillance. Just as those robots are walking cognitive biases, they are also walking data collectors. To operate, a robot must sense or perceive, think and then act. And to operate it, all of those senses have to be on all the time. So robots see everything and hear everything. Back in the 17th century, Jeremy Bentham, a social activist, just created the perfect prison, the panopticon, where from a central point you could surveil everyone. These are actual prisons in the US. His design has been followed significantly, but it leads to this. Amazon Go, or 24/7 cashierless stores. Everything we do is surveilled, and it allows us to buy stuff much more easily. What happens once we have everything under surveillance? Subversion. We can be manipulated as well. And that's something that we need to think about a lot, because who is pulling our string or pushing our buttons? All of those social robots that are in our homes, in our shops, everywhere around us? Well, it's not always bad. I've invested in a company, Catalia Health, that does a social robot for complex treatment regimes, where people have cancer and the primary cause of death when you aren't being treated is lack of compliance with your treatment. And we don't provide 24/7 nursing in homes, but we can provide really successful conversational robots. Those are some of the good purposes, but you have to say who owns that data when it's a device that we're not building or owning ourselves necessarily. Back in the 70s, they worked out that if it was free, we weren't the customer, we were the product being sold. But there are solutions that I'm going to go through really quickly. There are many ethical groups out there, and I'm a member of a number of them, but I also work with startups who build robots. So we have to keep these very short and simple and clear. The first one is don't build killer robots. Simple, hey? Well, the US is one of the only countries abstaining from agreeing to do that at the United Nations right now. But the idea is that a robot should be a multi-purpose tool, not simply an autonomous weapons system. But I mainly work with commercial robots, and this might seem obvious, but robots should obey the law. The thing is, we really cannot code that into a robot. It's about the robot owner, the robot user, and the robot builder. So all of a sudden, all these consumers got drones and started taking pictures anywhere and ignored the fact that there were controlled airspaces. There are actually regulations about how you use the skies. And if you're in Europe, there are privacy regulations, so you cannot fly over your neighbor's house and take photos. If you're in the US, you're not so lucky. Robots should be good products. Well, unfortunately, products that are very early to market are likely to be comparatively untested, especially under all of the use cases that can happen. And what worries me is that a recall, once something is out in society, is terribly expensive. So what is going to be our motivation if it's actually just a troublesome behavior and not a physical threat? Robots should be transparent. And that's not as gruesome as that picture is. It just means that we need to know what the algorithm is doing, what the data set was, how those work together, and what behaviors that robot is trying to have with us. What are the interactions? What are the rules? Because as people, we will assume that robots are following the exact same social rules as we are. The problem is, they don't necessarily have to, and we don't know who owns that robot and why they're using it. Right now, it worries me that I see a lot of robots on the streets and in the shops, and most of them aren't branded, let alone licensed. So we don't know who's controlling that robot, what purpose it's there for, and we have no way of tracking it back and saying, robot with X license number did this. That's a very simple thing that we can be doing that creates a much more ethical framework in which we have robots in our society. And we need robots in our society. They are certainly not all bad. I could talk for a long time about all the global challenges we face that robots can help us with. Our productivity has stagnated for the last 50 years. We cannot make stuff any better than we were doing it 50 years ago. Ditto our agricultural productivity, stalled after the chemical revolution. We need to double our food production in the world over the next generation. And we have no more arable land. Not only that, but we cannot afford to be using water and chemicals in the same way. We cannot afford the waste products of our life going out into the world. We need to control that. We need to be more energy efficient. We have an aging population across the world. How are we going to support people to live more independently at home? One of the companies I work with has just launched, and they will be at New York Fashion Week next week, a super suit called Seismic, and that uses robotics technology to help people move. It's designed for people with illnesses or people who are aging so that they can be active in their daily lives. That's what robotics technology can do for us. And just a fun fact, I changed my name when I was 21, which is a very long time ago. But what I knew then was that I was passionate about understanding the mind of the machine and understanding the gender of the mind. And that's my agenda. Thank you.